2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zürn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Hello, today we're in Dublin. We connect with Padraic McMahon, Customer Success Manager at Hubspot. Padraic has worked in management positions at Google and at LinkedIn. But before that, he was the guitar player of The Thrills that had some major hits from 2003 on. Their first LP was going platinum in the UK and Ireland, and their top hit, Big Sur, has more than 8 million plays on Spotify alone and is still growing. We talk about the similarities in tech business and the record business, and the situational leadership of the producer role that brings a group of people to their optimum performance regardless of the circumstances. He shares with us what the HubSpot Unplugged week means to the team and compares the studio analogy with the importance of the work-life balance in working for a technology company. And Padraic gives us an example of the art of remixing, where visual and sonic cues help to make the best decision for the mix. Quote, where you invest, you need to divest. Hello, Padraic. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Christoph. It's good to speak with you, and great to be here. And wonderful pronunciation of my name. Bravo.
Thank you very much, and thank you that you told me before. Because where does it come from, Padraic?
So it's the Gaelic or the Irish of Patrick, and there's a accent, or what we call in Ireland a fada, over the A. So it's like PA/D, and that technically phonetically makes the D a W. So it's so it's almost like PAW or AIC. So there's the first bit of musical / tone to a name in our conversation.
So you're right in the middle of sound and pronunciation and things that we can hear and how we should pronounce them. And that's also my first question. So what was your first memorable performance or sonic experience that had an impact on you?
Wow. My first, I'll take the sonic experience piece. That had a real impact. You told the story before maybe, but I was 7 or 8, and I remember our parents had got a trial license in Ireland for this new television station. And it was called MTV, and now this is like 1985 or something. And now in Ireland at this stage, in 1985, you have 2 channels. Or sorry, 1986. Sorry, you had 2 channels. You had like radio or TV, station 1 and station 2. So we were part of some like pilot group or something. We didn't have the money for like fancy TV licenses or anything, but we got this thing, and they gave us a few different channels. But like there was 10 channels, but channel 10 was MTV. Now I was 7 or 8 at the time, and I'd never seen any kind of popular music. Completely musically devoid household as a child, nothing at all around the place. And suddenly there was just this window into like MTV at its zenith. And all these bands, and there was like Headbangers Ball, and there was Alternative Nation, and there was like Ray Cokes, and all these like amazing shows, and I'd never seen any kind of popular music before. So this was just incredible. I don't think my parents knew what was on it. I was just 7 or 8 watching stuff that was probably wildly out of my league. But then I used to let the VCR record. I gotta get like the 3 hours on a videotape of all the shows and watch them the next day because all the good ones were on later. But but I sat down one morning and I was eating my cornflakes or whatever cereal I was eating, and this black and white video came on. It was like and it was this band, and they were in a stadium, and I'd never seen a rock band in my life. I'd never seen a stadium in my life, but it was this live video, and there was a guy with a top hat, and there was this guy in like stretch lycra pants, and they were singing about some paradise city somewhere where the grass is green and the girls were pretty, and it was they looked really cool. And there was this rock, and the guy had a guitar around his ankles, this gold guitar, and I remember just sitting there with my mouth open, going, I hadn't really heard rock music before, let alone seeing like a live Guns N' Roses stadium video for Paradise City, and it just floored me. And I think from then on, it was like, that just sounds and looks amazing. I want to do that. And I remember saving up my pocket money, my mum running to the shops to get like Appetite for Destruction on tape, which is my first record. I remember that was the moment I always remember just being floored as to what on earth was I seeing and hearing.
Wow.
And that was rock music for the first time, I think.
When it comes live in, and also the visuals, so the sound and the visual. Wow! Can you tell us a little bit about your background and who you are, and what do you do for a living?
Sure. I'm a jack of all trades. I'm a master of none. I think I graduated from university. I started my own company in web design and internet technology, kind of in the late 90s, early noughties, kind of helping designing websites for small enterprises around Ireland, and doing some early online marketing back in the kind of early days. Then I went to university. I was teaching for a few years in technology and business in two different universities. I had loads of students. I loved it. Teaching was a brilliant job. I really got a lot of kick out of it. But then I was in a band part-time, and that band got signed to EMI Virgin Records globally. I left my 100 exam papers after our exams, so if my students marked them up, got on a plane, went to Los Angeles, recorded our debut album with the band The Thrills, and released, toured for around 6 years, releasing 3 records. Late 08 took a bit of a hiatus. The band kind of decided, let's kind of give it a pause, and then we're still on indefinite hiatus. Took a year or two to figure out what I wanted to do. Was thinking about photography potentially, and going to study in the Space Institute to go work with Reuters as a photojournalist maybe. And then in 09, I made the safer decision rather than go get shot at in a bunker in Basra with my Leica. I decided maybe I'd go back into tech, and Google was around the corner. So started working in Google for a few years, back in business. Then was working LinkedIn for around 6 years. Stopped for a year, went back to be a student, did a full-time MBA for a year, really enjoyed that, and then been working at Hubspot, a software company, for the last 2.5 years. So that's my checkered career.
Wow, absolutely. So it sounds like a patchwork career, but there must be a red line. So let's see where we hanging out.
It's in there somewhere
in the next half an hour. So if you talk about HubSpot now, what are you doing, and what is HubSpot?
Sure. HubSpot, firstly, it's a CRM, or a customer relationship management platform. It's kind of think about a database for customers. It basically sells marketing, sales, service, and operations software that helps businesses grow and helps teams collaborate. The software company that helps businesses grow and market and sell their services. So really good company, high growth, unbelievably challenging. I manage our customer success team for our biggest, most complex accounts in the world. So we help those largest customers succeed and grow. So it's an amazing team, amazing company. Look to be part of it.
How different is this the work from HubSpot with let's say the big tech companies you worked before, like the LinkedIn? Since I don't know when they were bought by Microsoft. Was it before?
LinkedIn, it was there. I was sitting by the pool on my holidays with my fiance at the time. I remember my phone buzzing. I'm wondering what the hell is happening, and that's why I always remember Microsoft buying LinkedIn, because it's unusual for my phone to be going on fire, and it was very under wraps when we were acquired. I think it was 2016, the Microsoft acquisition, around that time. Yeah. But it's pretty, like, I think in tech companies in general, the work is quite similar. The companies generally have a really well articulated vision, in the same way any band does. They have a logo, a look, a culture, their own vision, and a lot of those are quite transferable. But in terms of the work I do, I used to work in a little bit in employer branding, but mostly just in digital marketing across all the 3 companies.
Before that, you worked at EMI, or even before you were the guitar player, or the everything with the strings.
Exactly, yeah. Anything with strings. It was bass, lap steel, guitars, hacked banjos. I think anything with a string, I was reasonably okay with, and I could throw in a falsetto harmony. We generally tend to have quite Beach Boys esque, I'd like to think, 4-part harmony in the band. So I'd be sitting up in the top register, sounding more like a female than the 25-year-old that I was. Strings and falsettos, basically.
That's really exciting. And I just had a look on Spotify. So you still have more than 100,000 listeners per month. And I think, and Big Sur, that's the top number, is around 9 million. So can you tell us a little bit more about the thrills and how is it working? Maybe, just tell me if it feels like working in a band, or how did it work out for you?
That's a huge question. The being in a band, yeah, I mean, I think it was especially in our 20s, like I always say, it's a young person's game or young man's game. I couldn't imagine doing it now, but it's the best and hardest job I've ever done, like bar none. I think that being in a band is 99% like perspiration and 1% inspiration. It's a lot. It's work. It's a lot of work. I think the sheen of what it looks like if you're in the audience as to what like the life of a musician is largely a myth, which is a self-serving myth, which is good for the industry. An amazing experience, and like required, like I think like any kind of, in terms of business, it just requires so much hard work, like a work ethic, and it requires to sustainably succeed in it, and it requires just a ton of luck as well in equal measure. But yeah, a privilege to be able to have that opportunity to be able to record like 3 like really solid records that I'm still unbelievably proud of to this day, to tour the world multiple times and play every stage, festival, TV show you thought of. It's just a wild, amazing experience. But definitely the most rewarding and toughest thing I've ever done.
And can you tell us a little bit more how this was organized? Was it more the touring, or was it more first recording and then going on a tour, or playing in clubs and in venues and then going back? So how does this work? So also the relation, being on stage, getting direct feedback from people, and maybe getting later to sleep than you might want, and on the other hand, working hard in a certain time pressure to get a record out because there's a big company that invested money in you and they want it back.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is so, like, in the same way you have a real like level of cross-functional teams in tech, and you have matrix organizations. Like the record business at the time was no different. It's no different. We had so many people around us, and from retail to merch to radio to promo to producers to touring to merch to publishing. There's so many partners around you that all want you to succeed and all are vested in interest. And if you don't succeed, it's you're cut. I think in terms of the time spent, you're spending a lot of time writing wherever you can. You have your entire life to write your debut album. Album number 2 is very different. You're writing in a tour bus in a hotel, and and I remember Connor, our singer, and wrote most of the lyrics talking about how the constant challenge not to be singing about hotel rooms and long distance phone calls on album 2 as a trap. But certainly like a huge amount of time just sitting in a room trying to like architect and write what is a great record. And like a ton of time and investment in that. And then once that's done, then you disappear into the studio for 3-4 months and don't come out until it's done. You emerge kind of a mess, but you emerge proud, hopefully. And then you start the promo and actual like hard physical touring. And then you're talking about that direct feedback. I think that's where you start to get all of that. You kind of, because your inside out view of the record versus outside in view is very different. So how other people.
What's the difference? What's the difference inside out?
I think like if what you hear in a record or your message, you lose perspective after a certain time, and you think that the songs are about one way or they won't be received well, and then outside in terms of like externalities, people hear them in a different way, or there's some wider zeitgeist that's informing or promoting or disqualifying the music that in the listener's ear that you're not aware of. But it's up to the kind of gods to decide if it lands well. And that's when you start that kind of like in the same way of like in work at the moment, we have in our culture code, we have a massive tenet around the power of feedback. in business, and it's core to everything we do in work today. But in music, it's that direct, visceral feedback when you stand on stage and try a new song, or it's released and you play it live for the first time, and you stand in front of the stage with everybody singing your first record back at you for the first time, and you're like, oh God, it landed. And I think that's in terms of like the 1%. I think it's 1% like of that like time you get the flash of an idea, but it's 99% crafting it. And then similarly, it's 99% of running around the world being exhausted, but it's the 1% of the day, which is the 70 minutes on stage. And that's the real like actual performance. And that's when everything is manifest, comes together, and you disappear to a different plane, and you come back off like a plane of existence on an airplane. And you kind of come down from that, and then kind of I think that's the kind of crystalline moment of the job. I think is those kind of moments where you're free to just play the songs directly, like to people in a sweaty environment.
Wow. I like your comparison with the first record and the second record, because the first record, so some people must know you in some way because you played in a small venue, or you're sending your tapes to a record company. You might get a producer and they tell you what to do, or the other way around, they let you do where you're good at, because they think if they get you very pure, then this will be a new thing. How did this work? And you also had a producer, a manager, a lot of people involved, and basically you were 5 friends playing together.
Yeah, we're 5 friends since we were like very young. Like some of the guys since we were born, and the rest of us since we were in our very early teens. And you're right, there's kind of a lot of stakeholders. Like by the time you get to a record, you got like the head of the label, big voice. You got the head of A&R. It's his job on the line if the record doesn't work out. You got your producer, Tony Hoffer did our first and third records. Was unbelievably gifted, like producer, and just a great like manager as well. Like managing. It's the first time I got like an insight into really effective management. Was like 5 lunatics in the studio, and you're trying to control these personalities and egos and all the nonsense that goes with it into like the optimum performance. And regardless of how that works, if it's, lads, go away for 2 days, I don't want to see it, you're tired, go and enjoy yourselves, and we'll rack up the studio costs, but you need 2 days, you need to rest your ears.
Wow.
Or if it's, the big calls of, like massaging the ego of one person going, yeah, the performance was good, yeah, let's try it again. And, delivering feedback in the moment to get that performance, regardless of, with the different personalities. It's a masterclass in management, to be honest, and personnel management versus just producing. And like, obviously he's got serious sonic chops. But that was I think watching Tony work was a really good example of just like personnel management, I think, as well. But you got the stakeholder, the producer, the engineers. So a ton of people around you, like, and that can change depending on the act. I think for us, we didn't play live before. We spent 5 years trying to write what was our like kind of perfect record, like 10 tracks, 3.5 minutes each. We were obsessed with like Burt Bacharach and the art of like really tight songwriting, like no filler, hooks, everything well architected. And so we had the album, and we knew what it was, and we had a fairly decent demo of it. And at the time, the label was very supportive in just saying, like, the head, Philippe Ascoli, who's the head at the time, who like signed other bands like Air, and great bands like that. And
was this before you signed the contract? Because you just said it was 5 years that you crafted this first record or the first demo. Was this to get signed, or were you signed to do this?
No, we had the record, and then were signed after with the record kind of in the bag, recorded or written rather.
Okay, but this means you did some big investment in time, in money, and in all the people involved.
Oh God, yeah. There was like before we got the band, or sorry, the record deal. We had, I think, 7 years of constant work, to get to that point. We had this blind, infallible belief that what we were doing was amazing, but someday somebody would understand. Even though at the time a lot of it sounded horrendous, but by the time we got signed, the record was done, was written, and in that case, we were very lucky with the record label we chose. The head Philippe had a complete belief in the what the record was going to be and what it would sound like, and our influences, and backed them. And kind of in his brief to Tony was very much like, I know what this needs. They need to sound like they do. Just let them at it. And it worked out. Fortunately, in the end.
And when you had the demo, how much did it change? Because then you had to go again into the studio, then with a producer.
Yeah, like we demoed ourselves in kind of studios around Dublin with friends and stuff. And I think it did change quite a bit. It just sounded, in some ways, like more polished and less polished. I don't know. Like some of the earlier demos even were quite slick and quite produced because we could, and they were shiny new toys. Whereas like Tony knew when to like say, no, put that toy away. Like, we're going to use this old mixer because it was used on a Neil Young record, and this old like stand-up piano that was used by Carole King or something. And we don't need these fancy tools or compressors. Just like let it breathe a little bit. So even in some ways, some of our earlier demos were a bit like sounded a bit fake, whereas I think the actual final product was a little bit breathier, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. So sometimes when I talk about business and music or music thinking, then sometimes comes up let's say the metaphor or the role of a conductor. So then you're about classical music, but that only works if you have composition and you have a score. On the other hand, in the last years, we talk about improvisation, and meaning often improvisation when something goes wrong. Now let's improvise, and then you get the jazz improviser. But in talking about pop music and the role of the producer, I think that's a very interesting one to understand. So this, let's say this triangle for leadership, for who is doing what, and in your example that he said that he also had this experience to say, no, we don't do this. It sounds good and sleek, but someone else did it before, so let's make it more special. So can you tell us a little bit more about the producing, and maybe then also from the first to the second album, because the first one was very, very much you. And then someone, let's say, made it better, in my words. And the second one, then people already know that new sound, that new voice. So you have to do it again. You have to iterate everything, and you don't have 7 or 5 years to do the next album. So,
no, you don't. Yeah, you don't have your entire life to do it again, but you definitely have for the first one.
But my question was about the producer. So, what makes the producer special, and how can he or she what's the leadership in the producer?
In terms of leadership, like directly, it's situational. It's situational leadership. I think the role of a record one and a record two are very different animals. I think often require different producers as well. I think our second one was written in the back of tour buses, in sound checks. So it had a bit of more of a live feel because we were playing the songs like in sound checks on a stage, on a pretty large PA at the time for like a venue, or in a hotel room or wherever the hell we could. And it just has a different theme. You're in a different place, like we were in our different places in our lives as five men, as well. So you write about different things, and I think with that you need a different producer, and we took a different producer. And we went back to Tony for number 3, but we worked with David Sardi, who would work with like Johnny Cash. I remember when Johnny Cash like Marilyn Manson in terms of breath. Amazing guy, but very much it was still obsessed with songwriting in terms of a focus, but we wanted their second record was also after like touring the first, so we developed quite a good like live and hard-edged approach live, where we'd be leaning into songs quite a lot. And the second album definitely, I think, echoed a little bit of that in terms of the tonality of it, the themes of the songwriting, and the songs were just a little bit more hard-edged, which I think we needed David for as well. But similarly, you're also in a different place. You're bringing all that, the institutional knowledge of your band forward, where you were a fresh prospect. Now you have expectations, both financial, in a business world, again, like your targets have just gone up because you smashed the first ones. And now you have a legacy of success behind you. So you got to raise it again. And you're doing a very different thing. So that side of it was difficult. Still really proud of the results, but I think sometimes you need a different leader at a different time in, like, if it's an organization's maturity or a band's maturity, often you need different leaders at that different time. And even within the band itself, in terms of like members, certain members may step up or down depending on where the band is at that stage as well. So I think to answer your question, I think it's just like situational.
Oh, great. Because that's also very nice what you already just said, the link to business, where a lot of things are situational. Maybe one question also about the dynamics or the group dynamics. So if you're 5 friends, how long can you be friends under all this pressure and different things that are happening? And how does this work or how did this work in the band?
You go all the way down with this one, Christoph. I think in seriousness, I think we were kind of different because I think we were very privileged. Like, we were all 5 friends from middle class backgrounds in South Dublin. We came from a background of privilege. We were all educated. We all had really supportive families. So there was only so far we could kind of push it before the others kind of checked each other back into line, and we were kind of we kind of took care of each other. But we were educated, and we knew the upsides. We knew the business as well. We knew how the music industry worked. So even though we were pretty blind going into it, in retrospect, we did know much more than others at the time. So we were kind of mature. Now, other people go into the industry that don't have that privilege, and they get eaten alive and like spat out. So at least we were going in. I think that kind of helped us as friends as well, that we were coming from a good background and we had great support mechanisms in our family as well. So we're privileged, like white educated males, essentially. So I think it was fine. I think there was always a kind of, in business, there's a thing around the Schumpeterian waves of creative destruction, which is an old industrial manufacturing concept, I think from Schumpeter, that talks about like the relevance in terms of like organizational and technology and innovation change, that like you need waves of creative destruction. And I think in songwriting as well, we were the same. We would take a song from Connor and we would butcher it. We'd rip it apart, and Connor would sit back and let his precious baby be dismembered on the floor, and then he'd sing another song, and we'd take a Frankenstein approach, take the head off one child and put the legs of the other one on, and fill it with the chest and the middle 8 of another one, and it would become Big Sur. Like, Big Sur is 3 songs. It's a verse, chorus, and a bridge from 3 different tunes, but key shifted and modulated into like one. And I think Connor, in his defense, it's a conversation between 2 of us, obviously, so nobody will ever hear it. But in his defense, he was always amazing with that, in terms of like being open to feedback and not being overly precious in terms of his songwriting. So we could sit back and like creatively destroy his entities and kind of in terms of innovation, then make them into something better. But he wasn't like overly precious about that, which takes a specific, I think, type of creative to be able to sit back. And I think in business, like, that's something I still like love doing as well. I love like stepping back and like being open to ripping something apart because something can be better. Versus I'm kind of not fearing change in that way, to say, listen, it's going to be a journey. Let's see where it goes. And I think that comes from, I think that was informed probably from a lot of that.
Oh, that's interesting. Creative destruction as part of the creative process. So, and this also means you really you dive into it. Kill your darlings, all these slogans that we know. But it's also trying to get your hands. You get your hands dirty and really get everything out of it. Is there a switch from the music to the business? Because if there is a switch in your career, because then you went to, I think, EMI, and then which is still in the music area, and then you go to Google, and until now to HubSpot. Do you see any comparison, or could you say that you are prepared in the way how you worked as a musician to be a better you than you are now in your business?
Yeah, I don't think there's like a massive difference between the two in some ways. I mean, obviously on the surface there is, but like deep down, you're talking about like red threads. I mean, the threads between those two things are you're working with people in very creative environments. You're working with very ambitious people. They are generally working in an industry that's like that is moving fast as the music industry does. They rely on the same principles. Like I think that the person I was as a musician and I am a business, or that I am when I'm sitting in my home now, there's not really much of a difference or a delta between those three at all. I think that's us just getting older as well. You're a bit too old to care or put on faces anymore, and we all do it to some degree. But I think the person, if I was today, like stop work and go like tour our first record again, I think I'd be pretty much the same as I was in my personality at work. I don't think there'd be any real difference between those things at all at this stage. I think maybe when I was 25 might be different, but now, no.
Does it help now? Do you sometimes think about that you get reminded in situations in business where you think, oh, hey, hang on, that's some kind of more or less the same pattern than we had before when we were touring or were doing a record? Do you have these moments?
Yeah, I do. And that's where they're the same. So, like, to give an example around that, I remember. So, work-life balance is a huge thing in tech, right? And at HubSpot, for instance, we've got a week off in July for the whole company to recognize the fact that, like, it's called HubSpot Unplugged. Obviously, on a musical tip as well, but it's a week off for the entire business. And we have a skeleton team, obviously, that's going to keep the lights
company.
on.
So
the whole
everybody
company.
Really unplugged, literally unplugged.
Literally everybody. So the business is going to stop. Now, we have a skeleton crew, and our customers, our 130,000 customers, need not worry. Their entire tech stack platform's going down. But we have our crews on like there. But the business is taking a week off. Now, that's in terms of that's speaking to the concept or the tradition of burnout and just against the music industry. Burnout and stress in tech, and the kind of speed of quarter on quarter rampant growth, share price pressure, everything. Like getting 120, 130% growth every single year. And that, that takes its toll on people. And I remember, so work-life balance is something like as a manager, I try and lead from the front on, or try to keep an eye on so I can raise my family and not get too stressed. But the studio analogy is I remember thinking about work-life balance, and then I was sitting like looking at making a prioritization matrix of what was urgent and what was important, what was not urgent and important on an XY axis, and dumping everything in the bottom left, and kind of recalibrating where I was spending my time. And I was like, right, I want to get involved in project A, which means I need to remove these three things in the bottom left. And I remember going like, I can't just get involved with this unless I take something out. It's like a zero-sum game or a non-zero-sum game. I need to invest my time somewhere. I need to divest somewhere else. And I was looking at this matrix, and I just flashback back to a conversation with Tony on our first record, where he's talking about like the how efficient or how well a mix sounds. And the art of mixing is a real art and a science together. And I remember he'd be sitting with me in front of the desk, in a big, massive, 100 and whatever track desk. And
so 100 different tracks.
Just tracks, automated faders, all linked up to like just tons and tons of equipment, and listening on the reels and watching, the kind of waveforms in terms of like the Pro Tools setup. And he was like, right, Padraic, I remember joking. I said, I want more guitar, Tony. He said, well, every guitarist wants more guitar. And then if the solo comes in, and I said, I want more of my solo. And he's going, okay, Padraic, listen to your solo in the mix where it is now, and then turn it up. And then he's like, look at the waveform as well, and look at where that mix is playing. So if you think about a guitar line, that like exists up in like the treble range. So in terms of like kilohertz, it's up in like the 2.5, 5 kilohertz range. It's up the top end, the trebly bit, basically. And he said, like, if you turn the guitar up, that's now inhabiting more of that 2.5 kilohertz range. You need to do something to counteract that. Like, what else is in that range? And I go, okay, you listen and look, and I'd be like, right, the hi hats, like that's there, right? The right hand of the keyboard is up there. The plinky upright is sitting in there. My falsetto harmony is sitting in there. Behind it, there might be some cymbal decay sitting in there. And then counter to that, all down the other end are all the mids and the basses, and the left hand of the piano, the bass drum, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you said, yeah, I can turn up the guitar, but like, what happens around it?
Oh.
And suddenly I couldn't hear. Yeah, I could hear more guitar. Like, that's very clear to the ear, and I'm happy. But with a production ear, or like an objective ear, I couldn't hear as much. My vocal was being swamped out. This is the falsetto, and I'm missing that high fifth harmony. Over the mix, it was missing. It's taking out a little bit of the attack of the hi hat. So he was like, "Yeah, that's fine. Now, to turn up that guitar, let's do it. But now we got to rebalance all this other stuff around. So like, what isn't important? We'll be back at your vocal a little bit." I was like, "No, God, no, you can't do that." We'll be back out the piano's right hand, sure. Take out the penis. But it was that kind of like balance of adding and subtracting, and where you invest, you need to divest. And I remember sitting there going, God, I remember that conversation with Tony, and I had the principles were kind of essentially exactly the same.
Wow, that's interesting. So, and it was also visual and sonic that you compare, and also the learning here is if you have the feel to turn up one instrument from the 100 instruments on the sliders, it will have an effect on not only on the others, but on the total sound experience of the whole. And it means if you turn it up, you in some way turn the others down or bring them into trouble. Oh, that's that's very nice and interesting. The composition was done and the recording was done, so that's the mixing at the end to really make it sound good, so that everything that should be heard and that's intended should be heard by everyone.
Exactly, yeah. In the same way, like the cut of a movie can completely change, or the soundtrack versus like the 35 versus the film that was shot, like that's lying in canisters. By the time you sit down at an editing desk and cut that film, you can make it into anything. And there's a whole art to that in film as well. And I guess in business as well, you have parallels too. But I think the mix is a huge part of making something like shine. And we did remixes of various versions of songs. Like we have a remix of Big Sur that we did because AAA were format at the time in basically American radio at the time was super like highly mastered, very produced, kind of edgy. It needed to be loud. And if you were trying to get out like K-Rock or some big like North American radio station, it needed to sound like that to be fit into the format at the time. And I remember we remixed Big Sur like for that audience. I mean, I hate it. It sounds loud and brash and edgy, and it just sounds like shit. But anyway, I remember we were forced to do that, and that was the power of a mix, to try and desperately get our product onto those high margin shelves.
And did this get get on the record?
Oh God, no! Thankfully, it was like it was a mix for the single after
right.
for radio. So it might be on some B-side version of a single somewhere, I think.
Because I think that's interesting. If you make a mix, let's say for radio or for a certain audience or radio audience, and you make it for an album later for the single. Now we're in Spotify times, where I just look for Big Sur. And then what kind of mix do I get? Do I get the album mix, or do I get a Spotify mix? Which
you hopefully get the album mix, and if you're a premium subscriber, you get the proper whatever kbps version of it, and not the super compressed hideous one. And in the same way, like we were saying, like it's essentially just localizing a product. And at Hubspot we do a ton of localization efforts as well, where you take product development and you localize it. You take advertising message and you localize it. So kind of what we were doing was trying to penetrate a North American market that had a certain listening profile and listening like taste, and similarly like playing or pandering to that audience with a localized product. albeit like taking away a good bit of the original vision of the song while doing so. But that's business, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, as a multinational, with the stress on the national, you have
Yeah, exactly.
to nationalize or to localize your message. Otherwise, you would not get it across. Or as customer success, the customer success would be different per country or per localization.
Yeah, as it is, yeah,
Ah.
absolutely.
But who's the producer in the localization business?
Oh, who's the producer local? I would say the country lead.
The country lead.
So whoever is the like the head of insert country here. I think that generally tends to be on the sales side in tech companies, but like the head of France for HubSpot, or like at LinkedIn, like the head of emerging markets, or the head of Benelux, would be that kind of, like, I think, localized leader who would drive the local vision of what their country strategy is, and what they want to get out of, like, the DAC market or the Benelux market. And they might have different focuses and different customer profiles. I think they would be probably the most, like, senior stakeholder or kind of thought leader or producer, I think, of a localized message.
So if you want to bring out your album in different countries, you really have to listen first to your country, how they might respond to it, or how they listen. So
Exactly.
Actually, you produce for listening.
Correct. Yes, I think, yeah, you do. Absolutely.
So it's not only about you, about your personality. That's part of it. That's maybe the content, but the empathy part, the empathy to understand the other side, and you have to find the right mix between the empathy of how people listen or consume your product, and on the other hand, who are you as a company, and how much of you can you bring in relation to how people are open to are open.
Yeah, and I think it's not an absolute, like, it's a balance of both. And like in music especially, you might want to write a double record with 48 songs on it, but like half of them are rubbish. Or you might say, listen, that's what we'd love to do, but maybe it's not the best, like, commercial decision, or maybe it's not, like, so there is a balance of, like, listening, like, we're like versus just completely folding and ditching your own artistic credibility just to make stuff that's going to sell. And we could have done that on a number of occasions. I think one example of that actually was on the first record. We wrote it, although it's, like, anchored in California, like, in terms of sound, and if you think about the cities that are mentioned on the record, like San Diego, LA, Your Love Is Like Las Vegas, Big Sur, Santa Cruz. It's just, these are all song titles. Like, they're all over the place. And we wrote the record in Ireland when we were, like, morbidly depressed in the rain after being in America, like, before the band, living on a beach in San Diego for a summer. So we were, like, in a basement in a horrible street in the rain, like drug addicts outside, and just in this tiny cramped room trying to write songs. In that kind of 7-year investment before the record deal you were mentioned earlier. And we had two options, I think, like, write about our amazing summer we had and these great places we went to as an aspirational anchor, or write about, like, grim, rainy Dublin at the time and being, like, not good enough to get a record deal and just generally depressed. And we just use these songs, like these cities or these places, as kind of placeholders or placeholder lyrics, and kind of just put them in there. And it was like, just don't go back to Big Sur. It's not about going back to Big Sur. It's about, like, not being melancholic and nostalgic. Because when you go back to something, it's not the same, right? It's not like a tourist ad for Big Sur. It's not about the town at all. That's just a placeholder for this feeling as such. And at the end of the record, we sat down and we looked at all the lyric sheets, and we're like, God, there is literally, like, American, like, Californian cities all over this record. And we actually rewrote a lot of the record, like, just don't forget last summer instead of just don't go back to Big Sur. Like, alternate lyrics, like stripping out the cities, because we knew we were probably going to get tons of abuse. Why are these South Dublin guys singing about all these Californian cities? I'm like, this is going to come back and bite us. We're going to get, like, pretty rough. like who these guys think they are, like the birds or Neil Young or something, like living in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah,
And
some kind of
and
copycats. They're copying our sound.
yeah, and that's, and we were going to change them, and we said no. Like, kind of fuck it, we'll stick by it. This is the way we wrote the songs, and like to see what happens. And it would have been a tragic, but the pressure, I think, there was pressure to change them all.
Hmm.
If not from outside, internally within ourselves. And thank God we didn't. It would have been half the record without it. And we just said, no, like, okay, the audience, we might get stick for this, but you know what? And that's what I'm saying. It's a balance between the external forces of a market on your product and what you want to give. And it's a mutual understanding of both without completely caving, because completely caving in this case to the externalities might have actually ruined the actual stance and what it stood for in some ways. So better stand for what it was, polarize and annoy some people. But in the long run, it was the correct strategy as such.
Wow, that sounds like a learning for business as well, to be as much you as a brand, and to listen as much as possible to your audience. And sometimes also stakeholders are just more than just the customers, and try to bring them in the balance.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds like sounds very good. So, is there anything that else that you would like to share with business people, what they could learn from musicians or from music?
Oh God, I don't know if I want to be teaching.
Well, and we already touched a lot. So
yeah. I think
there's this. I love very much your creative destruction part, and really getting into it. We talked about the producer and the role, and also about what we just said, the balance. Is there anything that people that might not know the music, and now I will put it in the show notes so people will have the chance to listen. But is there one or two things that you would say this is something where you might hire musicians because they're the better collaborators?
Yeah, I mean, like I think I'd love to hire more musicians. I think there's a lot of people on my team who are musically gifted. I do think they bring a emotional intelligence potentially that I think there's an emotional intelligence that comes to music and to business I think you need to move people emotionally with a song, be it like a dance mix to like a soft like ballad or whatever it is. Like you need to move and impart emotion to a song. And I think the same as in business. You're dealing with people at the end of the day. And I think if you can make people like feel a certain way, you're going to be saying the right words and not just like talking nonsense and making them feel good. But if you can, I think if you are have a level of emotional intelligence, I think that's just an arts thing. I think it's, if you're an actor, you might have it, or if you're a filmmaker, or if you're a musician, I think the emotion is key. Like that's critical for impacting and influencing people in business. If you can affect how they feel and bring them with you, and I think that's something that like you do open yourself up to in art and songwriting. That you want to be able to understand like what are you making people feel. I think that's one piece. I think the other is around like one thing with COVID is that we're doing business remotely, so I'm speaking to you versus jumping on a plane and going to a cafe and having a coffee and doing this. And having maybe even a more in-depth like conversation and experience. But then that has brought with it it's kind of pulled away some of the emotion. I think it's like I used to be a real fan of, I call it MBWA, which is managed by wandering around. And I think it's an old system that came from an old Gemba traditional Japanese system for Toyota of just managing.
MBWA?
MBWA, it's managing by wandering around. You can see by somebody's shoulders, you can see by the way they walk in the morning, you can see by the tone of their voice, you can see by, they're wearing different shoes, or they're, you could or if you were to if I wanted to pitch something to a business head, I'd do a drive by their desk and see what kind of mood they're in. And I'd say, he looks a bit pissed off, I'm not going to go near them now. Or then she looks like in a great mood, this is a good time. And you kind of have all these nuances where you want to influence somebody, just pull them into a room quickly or like drop by the desk and say, hey, you okay? And I think you can be really effective as a manager and a business person doing that and get cross-functional buy-in by like just popping over to another building and taking the time to to speak to somebody face to face, and so much more nuance and by wandering around. And you can't really do that. We have great tools like Slack and HubSpot to help these things, but it's not the same. And I think I was thinking about this when I talked to you recently, and how much I missed that. And then I remember like the musical equivalent to that was the importance of sight lines.
So sightlines. What do you mean?
Sightlines in a band, so where you would where you can see the other musician. And like a sightline in a band is really important. Like on stage, can you see the bass drummer's right foot? Can you, or in studio, can you, like, are you in studio, are you in a round, are you looking at each other, are you feeding off in the sightlines, like visually seeing somebody's about to lean into a piano stab because of their shoulders means you can echo that on guitar. And sightlines are key. You don't, like, you play very differently if you can see each other and hear each other versus if you were like locked in isolation beats. I remember hating isolation beats or ISO beats in the studio because you couldn't see each other. You're just listening, your eyes closed, and when you can see somebody, you can see them prompting a note. You can see if they're actually going to lean ahead of a note and attack it, which is going to push you forward.
Giving you a cue to move forward or to change, or
and those cues with established bands would be just completely subconscious now. And it would just be another language that nobody else would understand and they couldn't even articulate, but you can just hear. So I'm not even going to try and articulate anymore because I'm just going to do it to service. But I think in terms of sightlines, I remember them being so important to see you and on stage and watching other people versus, and if a musician has had their head down for the whole show, they're not going to be the most dynamic performer potentially. And I think in work, it's the same. I really miss like the sightlines these days in the same way of that like impossible or invisible language, and that just informs you and helps you. And that's one thing I've kind of been thinking about a little bit recently as well. I don't know how to solve for it now, but anyway, I should probably have a resolution to this complaint, but I'm not sure what it is yet. But that's just something I've been thinking about.
Padraic, thank you very much. That really sounds good. The sidelines. So this also, for when people listen to us now, they can think about, hey, where are the sidelines in my business, or where are the sidelines when I go into a concert? What is the conductor doing, or where's the producer when you're on stage? So interesting, very interesting stuff. So thank you very much for sharing this with us, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Christoph. Thanks to you and your audience. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.